Now, although tomatoes are one of the most popular and versatile choices for the home grower, they are reasonably easy to grow. There are one or two things that can determine the success of your tomato plant, and over the years I've found there's two crucial things that veg growers have struggled to master in terms of producing successful tomato plants, and both of them are very closely interlinked. The first one is watering and the second one is feeding. Now, tomatoes are particularly water hungry, and it's really important that we keep an eye on our tomato plants and water them at exactly the right time. And what I want to show you in this video today is a really quick and simple method of ensuring that the water gets directly where it needs to the roots of your plant. And the beauty of this method is completely free. Now, in order to demonstrate this method, I'm going to repot this tomato plant here into its final pot, which is this 10-litre pot here. And all I'm going to need in addition to that are some water bottles and a pair of scissors. And of course, we're going to use the cane to support the plant as well. Now, the method I'm going to demonstrate works whether you're growing tomatoes in pots like I am, or whether you're growing them in the ground in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, or even directly outside. And it's so simple, you wonder why you didn't do it before. Before we start to repot this tomato, just a few general points about growing tomatoes. A lot of people grow them directly into the ground. That's absolutely fine. And if you are going to plant them directly into the ground, and that doesn't matter whether it's outside or in a polytunnel or a greenhouse, make sure you've got nutrient-rich materials such as good compost in order to plant your tomatoes into. Now, if you are going to grow them in pots like I do, you've got to make sure the pots are the right size. Now, I grow my tomatoes in stages, so when they germinate and they get their first set of true leaves, so when they're very small, I'll put them into quite small pots. And as they get a little bit larger, I'll put them into these pots here, which you can see are a reasonable size. But as the plant starts to grow and starts to become more dependent on moisture and nutrients, there's not going to be enough capacity in a pot of this size to satisfy its water or nutrient needs as it starts to get larger, so it has to be repotted. I found that these type of pots here, which are 10 litres and they've got good drainage holes in the bottom, are ideal for tomato plants, and that's what we're going to plant into today. So the first thing is, wherever you're planting tomatoes, whether it's outside or in pots, in a greenhouse, etc., make sure you've got some nutrient-rich medium like compost in order to plant the tomatoes into. Now, when you are watering tomatoes, you always water at the base of the plant, not on top of the leaves. It's the roots that need the water, because that's what's going to feed the plant and make it thrive. So you need to water directly into the roots. Now, when you have very hot and sunny days, it might even be necessary to water your plants more than once a day. The best time to water is always going to be first thing in the morning or later in the evening when it's a lot cooler, because if you water in the heat of the day, the water will go into the compost, but you'll find it'll evaporate very quickly and it might not get to the root. And this is where my solution comes in handy, because what we're going to do is introduce water bottles that will allow the water to go through the bottle and right down into the compost, straight down into the root where it needs it, and that gives it less possibility for evaporation. So let's start to repot this tomato here and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Now, the first thing we need to do is prepare our water bottles first. And for these 10-litre pots, the size of water bottles you want are these small 500mm, just the standard size water bottles that you would buy. Now, the reason you don't need a larger water bottle is because you need to ensure that the water goes directly down to the roots and not right down to the bottom of the pot, because as you can see, there's drainage holes in the bottom anyway, so a lot of the water will just go straight through into the bottom. And secondly, if we put our water bottle near the top over here inside the pot, you can see that it's round about here, which is round about 2/3 down the pot where the bottom of the bottle will be, and that's where the water will go, and that's exactly where we need it, and that is absolutely ideal. And all we'll do very carefully is get a pair of scissors and cut the bottom of the bottle off completely and discard that, because that's where our water is going to go. And also make sure that we cut off the label. As you'll see in a minute, I'm going to use 2 water bottles per pot, and because I'm transplanting 2 lots of tomatoes, I've now got 4 bottles ready to go into the pots. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is start to fill up my 10-litre pot, and the first stage will be to fill this to around about 1/3 full with a good quality multi-purpose compost, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. As you can see, I've poured some in the wheelbarrow just ready. So let me just take the compost bag out of the way, put the pot in here, and I'm literally just going to fill it up. And this is a really good compost to around about 1/3 full. I want the compost to be nice and loose. I don't want it to be too compact, because I want air in the compost, and that'll help with the water circulation. Next, I'll get my plant, take out the label, put it to one side there, and then just squeeze the pot just to loosen up the compost around the plant. As you can see, it's a nice healthy tomato plant and it's a decent size. So all I'm going to do is put my fingers between the plant and the cane and just gently, with the pot in place, just loosen it like this and then put it into the pot. Now some of the compost is likely to fall off around the roots, that's absolutely fine, but I've still got a nice ball of compost all around the roots, as you can see there. And I have kept the cane in place just for now, just to support the main stem of the tomato. Then I'm going to place that round about middle, and then I'm just going to start to fill up the pot with compost. You'll notice that I'm not trying to put the water bottles in just yet. I've tried that before and it's too fiddly trying to put the water bottles in at the same time as the compost. What I'll do is I'll fill this to nearly full with compost. Now without compacting the compost, when the compost is quite near to the top, I'm just going to take off the single tie that I've got because I want to push the cane down. And what I don't want to do is do that while the tie is there because that'll stress the plant. So now that that's off, I'm going to push the cane right down to the bottom. And then I'm going to retie the tomato gently near the top. Now when you're tying tomatoes, you can use these metal plastic ties that I've got here, or you can use string. Now always remember, when you are supporting tomatoes, if you're going to tie them to a cane, make sure you leave plenty of space. There needs to be plenty of room so that you can almost get your finger through, because as this tomato grows, the stem's going to get a lot thicker. And if your ties, whether that's string or these type of ties, is too tight, it's going to end up strangling itself. Always make sure there's plenty of wiggle room in the tie. And now that that's done, we now can put our water bottles in. So the first one I want to put just over here on this side. I'm just going to burrow it out, remembering that the compost is really loose, so this is ever so easy. And then put the water bottle in the hole that I've just made, and then put the compost back around it. And this time I will compact around the bottle, because when I water, I don't want the bottle to move. That will condense it a little bit, and then I'll just fill it up with a little bit more compost just around the bottle. And then the second one I'll place in exactly the same way, directly opposite the first bottle, by burrowing down, putting the bottle in and just compacting around the bottle itself. And then I will just gently pat down at the top and the surface to make sure it's all level, and just to give a slight bit of compaction, just so that the tomato plant beds in nicely. And there you can see I've now got the two water bottles in place. Now the beauty of this system is when I water, the water will go directly through the bottles to round about 2/3 deep of the pot and directly into the roots, rather than have to be watered on the surface and then have to seep all the way down, which will take more time and also increases the potential risk of evaporation because that water will be near the surface. That's not an issue with this system. These bottles will really come into their own when you have extended periods of warm weather, because these tomatoes will probably need watering twice a day. And if I can get that water directly to where it needs to be in the roots by using this system, that's going to be much more beneficial to the plant. So let's pop the label in and then we'll give it a bit of a water. So now I have both my tomato plants that are repotted into their final 10-litre pots. As you can see, I have the water bottles either side. Now for the first water, because the compost is actually quite dry, I am going to water outside of the bottles just to give the compost a bit of a soaking. But always remember, when you're watering tomato plants, never leave the rows on and water over the foliage. Always put the water at the base. So take off the rows. And what I'll do is just give it a good soaking right at the base, just to give that compost a really good wetting. Let that soak down. Do the same on this plant here. And let that soak down. So that'll soak down to the roots. Now what I will do for the first watering is just fill each bottle up once. So I'll take the rows off and just direct the water straight into the bottle. And you'll probably go straight down because the compost is fairly dry. And I'll do the same on the other side for this one as well. And now you can see all of the 4 bottles have now been filled with water, and they will start to dissipate slowly. Another good tip, if you're going away on holiday, say for a week or something like that, what you could do is replace these bottles with like larger 2-litre bottles, but instead of taking the lid off, just drill a little hole in the bottom, cut the tops off, then give them a good soaking before you go, and then fill those bottles up, and that'll give them a prolonged period of watering while you're away. Now there's no hard and fast rule about how often you water tomatoes because it depends on all sorts of different things. If we have particularly warm days, I'll water at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. If however I have overcast days or even when it's raining because these are outside, then clearly in those instances I'm not even going to need to water at all. But at least by using this method of having the bottles in the compost, you're directing the water to the roots, which is exactly where it needs to be. Now in this video I haven't focused on the general maintenance of tomato plants. I'll do that in another video in terms of pruning, diseases, supporting and all those types of things. However, as it's linked to the watering, something else that I wanted to cover is feeding. Now tomato plants do need feeding. They will need nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur and other trace elements in order to thrive. And it will be necessary to provide those nutrients to them at various periods during their growth. And the best way of doing that is to use a tomato feed, and there's so many on the market. I'm not advocating any one of these, by the way, they're just the ones that I personally use. Do read the backs of them before you buy them to understand what nutrients are in them, but also very crucially, the dilution that's needed because these are fairly concentrated. So for example, if I take this one, which is something called Tomarite, it's really popular in the UK, made by Levingtons, it tells me that I need 20 millimetres for every 4.5 litres of water, and there's a cap on the top here that has a measure. Well, 4.5 litres, well exactly how much is that? And the best way to understand that is to look at the capacity of your watering can. Usually on the side of your watering can it will tell you what the maximum litres or gallons that the can can take. This is a 10 litre watering can. 4.5 times 2 is 9 litres and this is 10, so just a little bit more would tell me I need 20 plus 20 and maybe another 5, so I'm going to need about 45 millilitres of this feed in a full watering can. And another major benefit of using this water bottle system that we've just installed here is that when I do use my tomato feed, I can feed it straight into the bottles and it will go directly to the roots. If you are going to use tomato feed, make sure you use the bottle thoroughly to tell you exactly when and how often to use these types of feeds. Usually as a general guideline for starting with tomato feeds, it's normally after the first flower trusses have started to appear. The flower trusses will be where the tomatoes will be produced. The trusses will eventually open into the yellow flowers, which will eventually be pollinated and come into your tomatoes. So these tomatoes have got no trusses on them just yet, but they won't be too far away and I will start to feed them then. So I really hope you found the video interesting, and I hope I've demonstrated how easy this is and how much benefit it can be to get the water to the roots of the tomatoes as quickly as possible. Remember, I've demonstrated replanting my tomatoes in pots, but you can still install these bottles around your tomato plants in a greenhouse, a polytunnel, or even in the open grounds because it works in exactly the same way. Now, if you've got any ideas of watering for tomato plants that you've used in the past that have been successful, let a comment below the video because it's always great to share these ideas with other vegetable growers. But I do hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow, grow fruit, veg and flowers, and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.